Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Our top story: Chinese companies have raked in over $2 billion from U.S. stock markets since last year. More on the risks of investing in them and why more are choosing to list. The consensus from U.S. intelligence community: America's biggest threat is communist China. Intelligence agencies publish their annual threat assessment. The Chinese regime is ramping up its power in cyberspace and the military. How should the U.S. manage the CCP's threat? We spoke to Congresswoman Ashley Hinson to learn more.
Frankly, they've been ripping off the American people for decades, and we've kind of let it happen. And so I think it's high time we actually take some really stern action to make sure that they are held accountable for that.
And the Trump administration adding over 50 Chinese companies to a blacklist. Details on Washington's effort to prevent China from using U.S. tech to advance its military. The three largest U.S. stock exchanges are seeing an influx of Chinese companies listing with them. That means the New York Stock Exchange, NASDAQ, and NYSE American. Plus, Chinese companies have raked in over $2 billion on these stock exchanges since 2024. As of early March this year, there are over 280 Chinese companies listed on these exchanges. The total value of their shares on the market amount to over $1 trillion. That's a jump compared to the start of 2024, when just over 260 Chinese companies were listed on these exchanges. But the number is more than meets the eye. That's because 19 companies have also delisted over the same time period, and 8 others no longer meet the definition of a Chinese company. Meaning in total, 48 Chinese companies have listed on these 3 exchanges since January 2024, raising over $2 billion by selling stocks to the public. The data comes from the USCC, a congressional commission that reports to Congress about U.S.-China relations. Another trend revealed in the USCC report: the number of Chinese IPOs rebounded in 2024 after muted activities for 2 years. The term IPO means initial public offering, a process where companies first sell shares to the general public to raise capital. Despite the rebound, Chinese IPOs were smaller scale last year, in part due to U.S.-China tensions and because China's authorities are ramping up control of overseas fundraising activities. In addition, the report says investors could support the Chinese military by investing in Chinese companies. One example is Hesai, a company that makes LiDAR sensors used in smart cars. LiDAR works by creating a digital map of the car's surroundings. It's a technology that can be useful for the Chinese military. Some U.S. lawmakers have raised concerns that the technology could be used to collect data on American drivers and that the company might share those details with China. The Pentagon has designated Hesai as a company controlled by the Chinese military. The consensus from the intelligence community is America's biggest threat right now is China. Intelligence agencies published their annual threat assessment on Tuesday. Here are the biggest findings on China.
At this point, a new report from United States intelligence chiefs says the #1 threat to the United States comes from communist China. The annual threat assessment says China has the ability to hit the U.S. with conventional weapons, compromise infrastructure through cyber attacks, and target its assets in space. It notes the Chinese army is expanding its capabilities and continuing to establish military bases overseas. The report says China has the capability to conduct long-range precision strikes on U.S. territories in the Pacific and as far as Hawaii and Alaska. Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard said Tuesday, China has heavily invested in stealth aircraft, hypersonic weapons, and nuclear arms.
While it would like to develop and maintain positive ties with the United States and the Trump administration to advance its interests and avoid conflict, China is building its military capability in part to gain advantage in the event of a military conflict with the United States around the issue of China's efforts toward unification with the Republic of China, or Taiwan.
Gabbard's remarks came during her testimony before the Senate Intelligence Committee during a hearing on worldwide threats to the U.S. The intelligence community report also says China is the most active and persistent cyber threat to the U.S. It noted that if Beijing believed a major conflict with Washington was imminent, it could launch aggressive cyber operations on critical U.S. infrastructure.
The critical infrastructure is a key area of concern, given what we know has already been exploited, these asymmetric attacks that have been placed within our critical infrastructure that are of serious concern, given how they could be exploited, especially during a time of conflict.
The report also says China is seeking to displace the U.S. as the top AI power by 2030. It suggests the Chinese military could use AI to generate misinformation. It says China has stolen hundreds of gigabytes of intellectual property to train its AI models.
We know that they are experiencing a boom in their generative AI capability and are competing very heavily against our own AI capabilities. Obviously, AI can and will be used across a multitude of every sector.
CIA Director John Radcliffe told the committee that China has only made intermittent efforts to stop the flow of precursor chemicals fueling the U.S. fentanyl crisis. He says that's because China is reluctant to crack down on lucrative businesses. The intelligence agency said China's long-term goal was to expand access to Greenland's natural resources. The report says it aims to use Greenland as a key strategic foothold in the Arctic. Still, the report says China faces daunting domestic challenges, corruption, demographic imbalances, and economic slowdown. It says Chinese officials appear to be bracing for more economic friction with the U.S. while looking for ways to prevent major escalation.
To talk more about the threat the Chinese regime poses to the U.S. military and in cyberspace, we spoke to Congresswoman Ashley Hinson of Iowa. Here's what she said. Congresswoman, thank you so much for joining us. Good to have you here. Now, that new report says, quote, China almost certainly has a multifaceted national level strategy designed to displace the United States as the world's most influential AI power by 2030. Given your work with the House Select Committee on the CCP, how well is the U.S. responding to such a threat, especially in the AI field?
Yeah, well, certainly that's at the root of most of the work we are doing on the committee. The committee stood up with the whole goal of making sure that the United States can continue to be competitive on the global stage with our adversaries, including the Chinese Communist Party. So when it comes to chips and AI, we've been having a number of conversations about what policies we need to put in place so that we're not limiting our own advancement of AI. And we're also holding the Chinese accountable for how they're trying to get around our trade laws and any duties and tariffs that we may have in place. So I've introduced legislation specifically targeting the trade enforcement because we're seeing that obviously escalate in addition to the hacking capabilities of the Chinese Communist Party. But you're right, this is all a part of a big strategy that they are executing on the United States. They have made it very, very clear that they want to be the global superpower, economic, social, and military by 2049, and that is what President Xi has said. So we need to be eyes wide open about what policy we need to enact.
And Congresswoman, speaking of the CCP threat, there's been growing concerns over transnational repression or the long arm of the CCP, even here on U.S. soil. Now, you have a bill called the Expel Illegal Chinese Police Act to impose sanctions on Chinese police institutions operating in the U.S. First, how is the Chinese regime getting away with effectively running police stations on U.S. soil? How will this bill put an end to that?
Yeah. Well, first and foremost, it's about spotlighting what they have been able to do. They never should have been able to set these up in the first place, but what they are doing is not only spying on the American people, but using these rogue police stations to then harass their own citizens who have left the oppressive regime that the CCP continues to run in communist China. So we need to make sure we're finding anybody who's been involved with this, that we're actually holding them accountable, and then we're expelling them from the country because they never should have been able to get away with this in the first place. So some mechanisms in the bill, and I'm proud to work with Senator Cotton on this piece of legislation, but some mechanisms include visa restrictions, freezing of assets, making sure that it's very, very difficult for them to actually have the resources available to prop up these rogue and illicit police stations. One example was, of course, very public in New York, but we know that they are trying to do this all over the country to again, collect information on the American people and continue to harass their own citizens.
And Congresswoman, another one of your bills is the bipartisan Securing American Agriculture Act to prevent China from controlling the U.S. food supply chain, specifically the amino acids in animal feed. Now, zooming out a bit here, the Council on Foreign Relations says U.S. exports, especially those in the agricultural sectors, will decline in the short term due to retaliatory tariffs from China, given China's history of targeting the sector in response to Trump's tariffs, as we saw in his first term. What would you say to those in this industry who are concerned about losing market access?
Well, we have to do something in this space. This is, again, food security, which is national security for us. And if China is able to pull these levers and control the supply in the way that they do, they've taken huge amounts of market for animal feed additives and, of course, things that we need to be able to grow healthy crops here in the United States. So I think it's quite indicative that the Chinese would not sign on to a UN resolution saying that they would not use food as war a few years ago. 91 member countries at the UN did. China did not. And I think that's pretty telling as to their plans for this portion of our supply chain. So, again, our bill is targeted on making sure USDA actually knows what our vulnerabilities are in this space, and then we can address those, rehome and reshore or friendshore as many of those as possible so that we can continue to have a robust and healthy food supply here in the United States.
And on that note, Congresswoman, you have several bills with the goal of holding the Chinese regime accountable. Talk to us about why this is such a focus for you in Congress.
Because, frankly, they've been ripping off the American people for decades, and we've kind of let it happen. And so I think it's high time we actually take some really stern action to make sure that they are held accountable for that. The piece of legislation I've referenced on combating trade crimes, they're forcing American companies out of business. This is about American workers and protecting all that they do to help keep this country great. Not so that they can continue to be undermined by the CCP. So we've seen those malign practices, whether it's duty evasion, tariff evasion, or one of the most glaring, egregious examples, transnational shipment. The law enforcement actually raided a company in the United States, in Ohio, that was complicit in this. They were relabeling these parts and marketing them to get around our trade laws. And we know that the Chinese continue to do this, not only through Canada and Mexico, but many other countries in the South Pacific as well. So we need to make sure we have the resources available to be able to go after them and hold them accountable, because it's costing our businesses billions of dollars a year. It's also costing American workers.
Very important indeed. Congresswoman Ashley Hinson, thank you so much for your time. President Trump ramping up limits on what American technology Chinese companies are allowed to buy. The Department of Commerce on Tuesday added 80 companies to a blacklist, and most of them are from China. The move would make it harder for American firms to export technology to these companies. The department said these sanctioned Chinese companies acquired U.S. technology to support China's military, adding the new restriction aims to disrupt China's development of hypersonic weapons. The move would close a loophole in U.S. export controls. Despite restrictions that block certain Chinese companies from buying American technology, affiliates of those sanctioned companies can still buy the controlled technology as long as they're not on the blacklist. This time, that affiliate is a major customer of U.S. chip giants NVIDIA, Intel, and AMD. The company is called Inspur Group, China's largest server maker. The U.S. said Inspur's affiliates were playing a part in China's supercomputer development, which has military applications. The Commerce Department also blacklisted companies from Taiwan, Iran, the United Arab Emirates, and South Africa. That's to prevent a pilot training school in South Africa from using U.S. resources to train Chinese troops and to block Iran's access to drones. Coming up, Vice President J.D. Vance and his wife are heading to Greenland this Friday. The trip was made public in a last-minute notice, and Danish leaders are not in the mood for such a surprise. As for why,
a lot of other countries have threatened Greenland, have threatened to use its territories and its waterways to threaten the United States, to threaten Canada.
And the annual report on international religious freedom is out. China nearly topping the list at second place. We're on that in just a minute here on China in Focus. Welcome back to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Vice President J.D. Vance is hopping on a flight to Greenland this Friday with his wife, Second Lady Vance. So now the Danish territory is preparing for a shift from the Second Lady's dog sled race watch to a state visit to the U.S. space base there, plus other security facilities. About that change, the Danish Prime Minister appears unhappy. She called the trip, quote, unacceptable pressure from the White House. Vice President J.D. Vance Tuesday posted a video to announce his trip and why he decided to visit.
I'm going to visit some of our guardians in the Space Force on the northwest coast of Greenland and also just check out what's going on with the security there of Greenland. As you know, it's really important. A lot of other countries have threatened Greenland, have threatened to use its territories and its waterways to threaten the United States, to threaten Canada, and of course to threaten the people of Greenland. So we're going to check out how things are going there.
President Trump on Monday repeated that the vast island was important for U.S. national security. Trump also said his administration was working with people in Greenland who want something to happen, but did not elaborate on that. The Prime Minister said the visit is clearly not about what Greenland needs or wants, but she said Denmark does not oppose ties with the United States. The Danish leader cited a 1951 bilateral agreement which established U.S. rights to move freely and construct military bases in Greenland, given Denmark and Greenland are notified.
Yeah, well, not provocation. This is friendliness, not provocation. We're dealing with a lot of people from Greenland that would like to see something happen with respect to their being properly protected and properly taken care of. They're calling us, we're not calling them. And I think Greenland's going to be something that maybe is in our future. I think it's important. It's important from the standpoint of international security. And if you look at the ships outside of Greenland, you have Russia, you have China, you have lots of different people and lots of different places, and it cannot go on the way it is. It's not going to go on the way it is. I'll make a statement. It's not going to happen.
Trump's messaging about the island hasn't changed. Greenland is a linchpin for the U.S.-led free world to preserve peace and security. But why? Geographically, Greenland sits on the shortest air route between Europe and North America. Economically, the island contains the world's top 3 rare earth deposits outside China. Rare earth is essential to making everything from microchips to weapons. And clearly, the U.S. is not the only one who has noticed. In recent years, increasing military and economic activities by China and Russia near the Arctic Circle are causing concern for the U.S. and its allies. Trump has criticized the Danish government of not being up to the job of maintaining Greenland. He previously refused to rule out using military or economic means to take control of the expansion. But those won't happen if a deal passes through. The Danish government has condemned Trump for his strong pursuit of Greenland. The U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom just released its annual report. It points out countries of particular concern to the State Department for allegedly violating freedom of belief. NTD correspondent Jason Blair reports.
Religious freedom conditions around the world do not remain stagnant, and individuals and communities continue to suffer profoundly at the hands of governments and non-state actors.
The State Department's Office on International Religious Freedom releases its annual report. The 2025 report recommends 16 countries to be put on CPC status, including Burma, China, Cuba, Eritrea, Iran, Nicaragua, North Korea, Pakistan, Russia, Saudi Arabia, Tajikistan, and Turkmenistan.
CPCs are countries whose governments engage or tolerate systematic, ongoing, and egregious violations of religious freedom.
During the gathering, numerous members of Congress gave remarks.
For decades, the CCP has carried out the Sinicization of religion, which is a full-scale assault on faith and the courageous Chinese people who choose to believe in a power higher than communism. The CCP has also been rewriting the Bible and other sacred texts, not to clarify them, but to corrupt them, twisting spiritual truth into communist propaganda.
This year, we see the heavy human toll taken by acceleration of the forces of autocracy, bigotry, and violence, from the genocide of millions of Uyghurs by the Communist Chinese Party, for their oppression of religious freedom in Tibet, suppressing religious freedom, freedom of language and education and culture in Tibet.
The United States Commission on International Religious Freedom is an independent and bipartisan federal government commission. They monitor the universal right to freedom of religion and belief around the world. It was created by the 1998 International Religious Freedom Act, or IRFA. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Jason Blair, NTD News.
Intelligence leaders testified Tuesday before the Senate Intelligence Committee. The hearing was held to discuss worldwide threats. Once it began, a protester interrupted the proceedings. Our Washington correspondent Luis Martinez has more on this story.
As the world became more dangerous in recent years, our intelligence agencies got more politicized, more bureaucratic, and more focused on promulgating opinions rather than gathering facts. After years of drift, the intelligence community must recommit to its core mission of collecting clandestine intelligence from adversaries whose main objective is to destroy our nation and our way of life.
For the first time, transnational criminal organizations like cartels and criminal gangs topped the list of threats listed by the intelligence community in their annual Worldwide Threats hearing, followed by the Chinese Communist Party and Iran.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Vice Chairman.
Witness will suspend. So that protester was a Code Pink lunatic, saying the greatest threat to world peace is funding Israel. I will observe, for the benefit of the audience here on television, that Code Pink is funded by communist China as well, which simply illustrates, speak up now if you want to be removed as well, whoever's saying that.
Republican senators asked the intelligence chiefs about the nexus in between Russia, North Korea, Iran, and the Chinese Communist Party and transnational criminal organizations, while Democratic senators questioned the intelligence chiefs over reports of alleged mishandling of classified information. FBI Director Kash Patel noted that last year 54,000 American citizens died of fentanyl overdose, and the Chinese Communist Party is complicit in allowing the flow of precursors to the drug to fall in the hands of transnational criminal organizations. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
The organization Code Pink that Senator Tom Cotton mentioned in the hearing is a so-called Women for Peace movement. The group views China as advocating for global peace. This stands in stark contrast to the stances of major democratic governments, which cite long-term and far-reaching accusations of human rights violations by Beijing. That's all for today's China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. If you have any feedback on the show or have something you'd like to see us cover, send us an email at chinainfocus@ntd.com. We'd love to hear from you. For on-the-clock original news coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for watching. See you tomorrow.